I finally got around to making a part 3 of this Canon 90D series. This one will focus on this EF-S zoom lens, the 55 to 250mm f4 to f5.6. And since I barely use this lens, it's only going to get one video. The 18 to 55mm lens got 2 videos because it's the lens that I use the most, mostly due to my laziness and cheapness, and it's probably the lens that you use the most due to your laziness and cheapness.
I love these lazy Saturdays.
It's Wednesday, Homer.
Work!
Anyway, this longer lens that zooms to 250mm, I would consider sort of a specialty lens because it doesn't have very many use cases. Of course, being a UX designer by trade, I look at everything through a, for lack of a better word, lens of use cases, where I ask the philosophical question of why something needs to exist. If I have to shoot something at the 55mm end, I have 2 alternatives that perform better, the aforementioned 18 to 55mm, and of course the nifty 50. So if you need a lens that zooms to 250mm, it's going to be closer to the long end where you're in situations where you need to get a close-up of a subject that you can't physically move towards. I bought this lens back in July 2019, and I'm going to show you the best applications I've had for it so far, including some shots I got with the lens before I bought the Canon 90D. So in the upcoming San Francisco Zoo and San Francisco Giants clips, I'm going to caveat them by admitting they were shot on the Canon T6i and not the Canon 90D despite the title. But these shots most certainly would look at least as good coming from the newer, more advanced Canon 90D body, and they'll give you some ideas for applications of this lens. Last August, I visited the San Francisco Zoo and got some decent close-ups of the giraffes from quite a distance away. The day after the zoo, I headed to the Giants game and captured some shots of the players at 250mm. Though I should warn that very few sporting events will allow this kind of camera and lens combination at their events. In fact, I was lucky to be led into this one. Because in spring 2020, I attempted to get into the San Francisco Giants Fan Fest, but was turned away because the 55 to 250mm lens is longer than the acceptable 3.5-inch limit, and they won't allow lenses into the stadium that are longer than that.
Oh, that's definitely not going to be allowed inside.
Can we leave these?
No, we can't hold anything for you. Take it back to your car.
All right.
Sorry.
This is too bad because sports would be one of the best applications for this lens. But as it stands right now, the zoo is the better option because unlike Major League Baseball, the zoo's desire for your money outweighs the fear that you'll profit from the photos you'll take there. Moving on to February 2020 when I took the Canon 90D down to the Pier to test the difference between the 18mm, 55mm, and 250mm zoom breaks that you'll get between the 18 to 55mm and 55 to 250mm lenses.
Okay, that's at 18mm. Now let's zoom in to 55mm. Okay, so I'm going to snap an image or two and then switch out this lens for the 55 to 250mm f4.0 lens. When you have it zoomed all the way into 250, it's really hard to get a clear shot of the moon when it's in video mode, but you could get some nice detail on the moon when you're just taking snapshots.
I should note that if I'm ever going to seriously photograph the moon with an APS-C camera, I'm going to try to get my hands on a lens that zooms to at least 400mm. The following month, March 2020, during my now unlisted daily vlogs that I used to document the very beginning of the lockdown, I headed to Levi's Plaza to get some St. Patrick's Day night shots of Coit Tower.
Wonder why the holiday lights are still on here. It's March, right?
The following week, on the 22nd of March, I captured some shots of the Bay Bridge that really shows you the strength of being able to zoom into 250mm. Just check out the detail on the bridge that you'd probably never notice with the naked eye, or in a photo taken with a lens of a more traditional focal length. And finally, earlier this month I went down to the wharf to capture some shots of the Golden Gate Bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge shots are an example of the best use cases for this lens, since I would need to get a boat to get physically closer, and even then I wouldn't get the same angle. So while these are examples of some of the cooler use cases for this lens is definitely not without its weaknesses. The first is that this is not a macro lens. The lens is pretty much useless if you get anywhere close to a subject. The second is that it's tricky to get handheld video despite the built-in stabilization. I definitely see this as more of a photo lens than a video lens, though based on the video I showed earlier, you can get some usable footage with patience. The last obvious con for me is that it's an extra lens. My ideal kit to bring with me is the smallest version of a single do-it-all camera lens combo that captures both decent 4K video and decent photographs. So 99% of the time I use the Canon 90D outdoors, I have the 18 to 55mm lens on it, and I don't even bother bringing the 55 to 250 because I don't want to deal with the hassle of switching lenses. In fact, during the zoo and baseball games, I actually had the 55 to 250mm lens on a backup camera body so I wouldn't have to deal with the hassle of switching lenses. At the time, my primary camera body was a Canon T7i and the backup was a T6i, but I'm no longer a fan of carrying around multiple cameras for basically the same function, just to have two different lenses on them. If you saw my Sony a6600 unboxing video, you might remember the 18 to 135mm lens that came with that combo. The other day I walked around with it to get some images and video, and it made me kick myself for not getting the 18 to 135mm lens for all of the Canon bodies I've used over the years. As versatile as the 18 to 55mm lens is, 18 to 135 of course is way more versatile, and it eliminates most of the value that the 55 to 250mm lens gives you, because 250mm in most situations is overkill. So you could have fun with this lens, but like any other lens you'll ever purchase, just decide for yourself how much value you're going to get out of it.